welcome to Mary Giuliani Live. I am so excited about tonight's show. This book that my BFF Jesslynn, Cody Armstrong, and I are going to be reviewing is really mind-blowing. So we're going to get to that in just a minute, and I'm going to bring Jess on. She's hanging in the virtual green room in Idaho. For the new people that are here, this whole show is all about transforming your life and creating a life that you truly love, where you're being true to yourself and you're really tapping into your inner gifts and taking leaps and going for it in your life. And so that's why we bring on guests or we review books every single week to talk about ways that you can transform. One of the things that you should do if you're not already on my email list is get on my email list, because every single week I send out one email just reminding you of who's coming up on the show. And also you get links, audio and video links from the last week's show, so you can just listen to them in the car while you're walking, or even the video version. So just go up to my website, marygiuliani.net, and there's a little link up there that says get show updates. And just put in your name and email and you'll get those. Also, if you have iTunes, you can go to my iTunes channel and sign up for the subscription there for Mary Giuliani Live, and get that automatically downloaded into your iPhone. So that's a really great way to do it too. And the cool thing is tonight we are making our main broadcast platform Facebook Live. And so what's so cool about it is that we can field the questions right within the Facebook app. And so we really encourage you to join us and make comments and ask questions. And that's the beauty of all of the Facebook Live. We were doing it on YouTube before, but I felt like we were missing the boat not being live on Facebook. What I did before is I would upload the YouTube video to Facebook like that night or the day after. But anyway, it seems like Facebook Live is the place to be. So here we are. And by the way, what would be really helpful is if you could share this show with your people while it's live, because this book, the Body Keeps the Score. I'm telling you, this is the most powerful book I've read in at least over a decade, and I read at least 4 or 5 books a month, and I can't wait to get into it. So, and the cool thing what's going to happen with this book is it's got such deep and transformational and mind-blowing research and everything in it that my friend Jess and I are going to make it a series. So we're going to have several shows in a row. So make sure you join us every single month. It'll be every single month on the first Wednesday of the month we have the Conscious Conversation Salon, and so that's what we're going to dedicate to this book for until we can get through it. So anyway, let's see. With that, again, feel free to make comments, questions, whatever you would like to do. We'd love to have you. I want to introduce one of my BFFs, Jesslynn Cody Armstrong, who's a physiotherapist and a photojournalist. And the last time we brought her on the show, she was in Alaska, and tonight she is in Idaho. So let's cut right over to Jess. Hey, Jess, how you doing?
I'm doing great.
It's so good to see you. You know,
oh, it's so good to see you.
Yeah, I mean, we actually had a really fun weekend with 3 of us, Jess, myself, and Carrie Palmer, all got together on the Oregon coast, and so that was so much fun, and we're so supportive of each other's personal growth and transformation. And so, wow, I started reading this book, like I said, The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, a Dutch psychiatrist, just about 3 or 4 months ago. And
Right.
I had heard about it through this one hip sobriety website, the woman that runs it by the name of Holly, as the best book she's ever read on trauma ever. And so the reason I wanted to bring this book forward is because, you know, I have been on a personal growth path for, 30 years now, and this book opened up some ahas that I had no idea were the root cause of a lot of the issues that I've been going through. And so I thought before I got into sharing a little bit of my story and just sharing her story, we could sort of go into just the prologue of the book is sort of mind-blowing. And maybe I can just start with it, Jess, and you can sort of jump in whenever you feel like it. I can see that we are live on Facebook, so yay, we've got 12 people watching. So thank you, and feel free to like us and do all those wonderful things too.
Yeah, thanks for everybody joining us.
Yeah, hi Parrish. I see Parrish just joined us. Okay, so the prologue is, so Dr. Vanderkolk was actually one of the first psychiatrists to work back in like the doing research for veterans from the Vietnam War.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's had just a really intense history with trauma. But what really blew my mind with this book is how he focuses on developmental trauma, which is actually trauma that happens to us as children as we're growing up in a dysfunctional environment. Or it can even happen to babies that have had surgeries or anything that's really traumatic for a child. And the reason why developmental trauma is so important to be aware of is because, well, first of all, I can't believe I've never heard of it. I mean,
Right.
like,
Nobody's talking about it.
Nobody's talking about it, and it's not in the DSM. And actually,
no,
Bessel
it's
Vanderkolk,
not going to be for a long time.
Yeah, and Bessel Vanderkolk is really making a plea to get it in the DSM, because unless it gets in the DSM, you're not going to get diagnosed with it. And but the point is that what this is when you're a child and your brain is in the it's developing, and you're exposed to any type of trauma or dysfunction, and of course it includes molestation and physical trauma and, obvious traumas. But in my case, I was not sexually molested, but I was raised in a very emotionally, what I say, violent environment with my mom who had alcoholism, and it was really chaotic and really stressful. And so, and it doesn't even have to be an alcoholic home. It can be a home where there's not a lot of emotional connection or attunement. So the point is that when children are raised in this environment, the brain, as it's developing, does not develop the way children that are raised in a more loving, nurturing, secure, and calm environment develops. And so what happens is the brain gets into the pattern of operating in a flight or fight sort of rhythm, and you become hyper aroused, and then all of this stuff happens out of that. And I'll let you jump in, Jess, but I just want to say this, is that I didn't even know I'd been hyper aroused for the last 50 plus years until I read this book, and all of the consequences of living in a brain that's in a chronic hyper aroused state. So what do you want to say, Jess, just to start off?
I feel like a lot of what we experience on a day-to-day basis, with so much information is coming towards us and so much is coming at us, that it's really hard to sort through if it's being done to us or if our brain is processing it correctly.
Right.
And of course, our society is going to talk about the most extreme and sensational instances of trauma.
Right.
But anything, by definition, that's intolerable or unbearable, depending on that person, is going to imprint on the brain. It's going to change the way we look at our lives and that we process information.
Yeah.
And it's actually changed the shape of our brain matter. And there are pieces of our brain that go offline after you've experienced something that's that uncomfortable. And I think we need to emphasize that everybody's threshold of what's uncomfortable is very unique, because we all have our triggers, we all have our fears, we all have our backgrounds, like you were saying. And we need to have a lot of compassion and understanding that many of these instances doesn't have to be, we don't have to understand going through to understand that it impacted them, and that we can give them the truth on how to work through it, instead of telling people what you went through isn't a big deal.
Exactly. Well, and that's so perfect, because I think, like sort of what you've just said is I always thought trauma was like this huge deal that you had nightmares over, because that's what I was, after, like in the 80s when they finally recognized the war veterans that had PTSD. I mean, it took them all the way to the 80s to do that. But when I was in my early recovery, because I've been in recovery with drugs and alcohol, and I started my recovery path like 30 years ago, I suspected, like, I remember thinking, just in my first 5 years of recovery, I'm kind of feeling like I have some kind of PTSD or something. And then I would go and look it up in the dictionary at the time, because there was no internet. And my symptoms didn't match up with PTSD. So I thought, okay, so I don't have trauma. And so
because you're not extreme enough of a case.
Yeah, and it's different. They call that shock trauma, whereas developmental trauma is a relational trauma, when your parents aren't attuned with you. In fact, they even talk about how basically the level of emotional health that the mother has transfers directly to the child. So if your mom had a lot of trauma in her life, that's the kind of consciousness that you're going to pick up, and if it's not healthy, that's what you're going to get. And so
Absolutely.
and I just want to make, I think one of the reasons why this hasn't come up is because it sounds like we're blaming our parents. And the big thing here is that my mom was traumatized because her mom was traumatized, and because her mom, my grandmother was orphaned.
It's a pattern.
It's a pattern. So it's nobody's fault. I mean, of course, if somebody beat you and did horrible things to you, of course they're responsible. It doesn't make them, not responsible. But the point is that we're not here to blame our parents. We're just here to look at, this is stuff that really does impact us, and it's it's the cause of a lot of suffering that doesn't necessarily need to happen. And so what would you like to say about that, Jess?
Right. I think it's just time for us to start talking about these things. It isn't about what was said or done, and it's not by blame or who did it, because it just is, and it happened. And a lot of what I've experienced is these patterns of my thought. And I've realized that there's a reason why I have these patterns of thought and the way I look at things. And it's because my brain has identified benign objects or benign situations or certain words and imprinted it as a threat. And when we all know what that feels like when we have a threat, our body has such a physiological response to it.
Right.
And we all feel that, the stomach knots, the gut feeling, the blood feeling like it's rushing out of us, which is getting ready for fight or flight. And it does, we need to talk about why that's happening and talk about it frankly and truthfully, so that the people that want to overcome this and want to feel like they have more power in their lives and they have more control over their lives can have those skills, and they can work through.
Absolutely. That's so beautifully put. Well, just some of the statistics that some of our viewers might not be aware of is, did you know that 1 in 5, just to kind of give you a feel for what are typically traumatizing things that happen to people and the percentages. So 1 in 5 children are sexually molested. So that's 20% of the population. 1 in 4 children are beaten by a parent to the point where a mark is left on their body. And this statistic really blew my mind. One out of 3 couples engage in physical violence.
Wow.
Yeah, I had no idea.
I can't imagine.
And then 1 in 4 people or children grew up with alcoholic relatives or parents. And then the last one is 1 out of 8 children witnessed their mother being beaten or hit. And so again, these are all traumatic things. And the thing.
And if they're not seeing that in their lives, they're seeing it in movies. They're seeing it on video games. They're seeing it in magazines and TV ads and all the music videos, that once you start repeating those kinds of things, the brain makes the chemistry, just like how we crave sugar or caffeine, or whatever your choice is that you crave. Our brain starts to crave those images, and it creates a pathway in our brain that's much more known and familiar.
Right.
So that if we are triggered by that benign object or that phrase or that person, our brain automatically jumps to that next conclusion where those thought patterns start, and we start that cycle, whether it's a shame cycle or a regret cycle or a guilt cycle or a blaming. But those pathways would have never been made if we hadn't seen something that had imprinted our brain for us to jump to that conclusion.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what we're talking about here, because the reason they call it developmental trauma is because a child's body, mind, and spirit is developing. And so we're more vulnerable. And so, for example, well, it talks about in the prologue of the book, you don't have to be a combat soldier or have been in a refugee camp to experience trauma. And the other thing about trauma is it not only impacts the victims, but everyone around the victims. So if your mom or your dad has been traumatized, like, for example, he talks about wives of men with PTSD tend to become depressed, and then children of depressed mothers tend to be anxious and insecure. And so trauma leaves traces. So for example, so this is the cool thing about this book is he is not just talking about this. He's actually providing the latest research from brain imaging of how it's a proven fact that when you're raised in a traumatic family, your brain develops differently. And so what happens is your brain gets on this, it's like your environment's constantly training your brain. And so if you're always worried about being hit or have your mother's or dad fighting or mom being drunk or not being able to sleep at night because of the fights, you get into this hyper-arousal state. And what happens is it becomes the natural, normal state for the brain to be in, because that's what the brain is used to doing. And so when you get into that state, here's the deal, is
that becomes the normal.
It becomes the normal. And so for me, I'm in the only brain I've ever been in and the only body I've ever been in.
Yeah, so you don't know the difference.
You don't know there's anything different. Well, but the symptoms that started for me is that I started using food. Well, you started using food when I was 5 years old to soothe the hyper-arousal. And back then, they just thought diet and exercise would cure it. And, there was tension between my parents, and I remember that. And I remember noticing that when I would eat, it would calm me down. So the eating was a way to actually self-regulate. And go ahead.
From a physiological point of view, when we feel like we're empty on the inside, of course we're going to go to something that we need to consume because we're not getting what we're looking for from that situation. Of course, food going in and having that sensation and that taste, and most foods, have a fat or a sugar in them, so it's going to feed the brain, it's going to light those areas up. And then when it hits our stomach, we feel a little bit more grounded, we feel a little bit more alive. We can say, okay, this is a sensation that I identify with, and it's not yelling at me, it's not causing uncomfortableness, it's soothing.
It's soothing, and it was what was available. And also it was my dad was a foodie, and so he modeled that behavior as far as a way to, when things would get a little tense, he'd say, "Mary, let's go to Denny's and get a short stack of pancakes," and it'd be like, right on, let's do it. And that
was kind of a clue too, probably, that everything's okay for now. Like the coast is clear.
Right.
Let's go behave normal in public.
Yes.
At a restaurant.
Yeah, and so the point is that I grew up having this compulsive addictive behavior with food, and then started gaining weight, and then started getting teased and bullied. And so then there was even more trauma on top of the trauma because I was being bullied. And so, and the thing about our culture is it trains us to believe, or the messages we get are, if you're overweight or if you have a food problem, it's because you're weak and you have no willpower. It's like a moral failing. And so then you feel shame on top of feeling, that already you're in a hyper aroused state. And the beauty of this book is it helped me realize that it wasn't my fault. I was born into an environment that I had no control over. And and the cool thing also is there's treatments for this type of brain dysfunction, because the deal is that it doesn't change on its own, and it doesn't change with just talk therapy. You need specific types of therapy, and that was another mind blower.
And the reason why talk therapy doesn't work is because, like you said, this is the only brain you've ever been in. And so if you just keep talking circles in the same brain, you're not getting any new information, and the brain isn't able to function in a different way through brain training, then of course you're just going to keep reminiscing and chewing on the same information. And like I said, all you're doing is strengthening jump points for those neurons within the chemicals and the hormones that just make those conclusions keep happening. So you can't really find a solution in that.
Exactly. I mean, I have to say, though, I feel like I've made a lot of progress in my talk therapy and some other support groups, but I still, even so, for me, the food thing kept going and going, and I kept gaining more and more weight. And then by the time I was 16, I was like so ready to be a party animal, because so what happens is this is another thing he talks about in this book, is that you are, when your brain is dysregulated like it gets with this sort of environment, you want to do whatever you can to soothe the discomfort, and so you're much more apt to reach for drugs and alcohol. And so then I was drinking and partying and smoking cigarettes and everything else. And that went on for another 10 years until I couldn't take it anymore. But again, I felt like there was something wrong with me. It was my own personal character, and it wasn't, I didn't know that I had a brain disorder. I didn't know that what I was doing, even though I got sober in AA, like in the late 80s, I still felt really compulsive. And I just, anyway, so any feedback on that, Jess?
Yeah. I think for me, what happened is I disconnected from my feelings, like my mind and my brain stopped talking to her. And I think that sometimes the messages that we take in unconsciously is do what needs to be done and don't worry about how it feels while you're doing it.
Right.
And when you start ignoring those feelings, those guts, those insights, anything that gives you feedback, because you just get the hand, you really stop connecting with who you are in your inner self. And I think there's a lot of people out there, whether they're uncomfortable in their lives, is because they've disconnected from their emotions and their feelings, which is their guidance system. It helps us know where we stand in this world and where our peace is and where our love and our compassion is. And for me, I made that disconnect point. And so it used to take me months to be able to process what I was feeling or thinking about a situation that was a trigger for me, that my brain had mislabeled as a threat. And now getting there, it takes about 90 seconds or so, but I've had to be really, really conscious that when I feel this coming on, I have to just hit pause with either the conversation I'm having or that I'm in the experience. I maybe need to step away and go, okay, I'm having a little glitch right now. My feelings and my emotions have gone offline. I have no idea what I'm feeling. All I know is that I'm uncomfortable. And how am I going to rationalize this? And what we need to remember is that when we are triggered, or when we are reliving a trauma, or we're going through a situation that's difficult, the front of our brain will turn off, or it will slow down. And it cannot keep up with the reptilian, the back part of our brain that first developed.
Right.
That part of the brain tells us when it's safe and when it's not. And if we need to get into fight or flight, sympathetic, parasympathetic with the nerves. And so what I did, instead of talking about my feelings or saying what I was really experiencing, I developed sarcasm and an attitude. And that was my coping. And I'm much prone to be angry than to be sad. Yeah. And I have realized that my spectrum of emotions when I am in a high stress situation is very small. It's angry and attitude. Because I want to protect myself. I'm feeling really vulnerable. And I'm working really hard on finding the rest of those emotions that I can tap into so that I can be more present. And so that people can actually know who I am. I don't necessarily want people to know that angry attitude side of me. I want them to know all of my heart. The only way I'm going to be able to expose that is to know myself.
Right.
And so I have to be able to recognize and label what I'm really feeling so I can have meaningful, heartfelt conversations with people.
Absolutely. That's so key. I mean, I so can relate to that. I mean, that's what he talks about in the book too, is that when we're in an environment where it's so threatening and so uncomfortable, we do shut down. We shut down our feelings, and it's out of protection. And I mean, he actually, I don't know if this book or another book I was reading talks about if the human species didn't have the ability to numb out or shut down, we probably wouldn't be here today, because, you know, when something's overwhelming, you need to have the ability to protect yourself. But the problem is that the brain gets so used to being in that shut down mode that then you lose the ability to access your emotions, and they go underground, and then they come out sideways in addictions or in sarcasm or in even in the other thing that really hurts people is it makes you feel unsafe in relationships. And so it's very common for people that have this type of developmental trauma. Another term I've heard it called is complex trauma. Is they either have super like walled up boundaries to where they isolate and don't want to just deal with people at all, because it's just too uncomfortable and too threatening, or they have very weak boundaries and they don't have a sense of themselves and they give up themselves for other people. And that was one of the things that I was trained in when I was growing up. Is my mom was trained to believe that you needed to put everyone else's needs before yourself. And so if you didn't, you were shamed as a bad, selfish person.
Oh,
and so
yes, horrible you. Shame on you.
Yeah, that's what it was. It's like,
how awful.
Yeah. And so the bottom line is you were supposed to give yourself up. So it's like the whole deal was, you know, I need to give myself up for you, and you need to give yourself up for me. And that was the message. And if you didn't, it would be like, don't be so selfish. Don't, you know, that's not how I raised you. And so, you know, the bottom line is if you don't meet that kind of demand, you don't want to lose your only caregiver's love. And so
of course. And you don't want to be abandoned.
Exactly.
Nobody wants to be left behind.
Well, and the thing that they talk about too is children, like the attachment to your primary caregiver, which is typically your mother, is like as important as oxygen. I mean, it's like you have to have it.
Oh yeah.
And so,
and remember, when you're in the womb, you're bathing in her chemical factory. So everything she's going through, you know, a lot of people talk about it's important what the mother's eating, and is it organic? Is she getting exercise? You know, don't gain all this weight. Well, what about her emotional health? I mean,
exactly.
All those hormones are raging, and molecules that are being exchanged between the womb and the baby and the mother, that counts too. And I am ready for us to start talking as a society about the emotional health and the safety of our feelings, especially when we've got another inside of us.
When we have a baby inside of us?
Yeah, another human being.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, and I know for a fact that my mother, when she was pregnant with me, was dealing with a very stressful, my sister was very colicky, for the first almost year of her life. And I was conceived just 3 months after my sister was born. So here's my mom with this little 3-month-old baby that's crying and just really hard to take care of. And then there's me inside of her belly that's, actually I was a rhythm baby. So they were hoping not to be pregnant because, they wanted a little bit of space. And so, anyway, the point is that, yes, it's so important to recognize that babies pick up on the psychological condition of the parent.
Yep.
So
babies and children pick up on many little clues and hints and body language and tone of voice more than we do. I mean, they don't have any filters. They haven't been told to, ignore that, and I didn't really mean that. And then with all the things that we say and do that we want people to get to understand us, but we're not being clear enough. Babies they aren't verbal yet with those things. So all they can do is pick up on that vibration or pick up on that feeling that is being given to them from the people around them. So of course they're going to pick up stressful situations that are happening.
Absolutely. And what's interesting too is so he just talks about, I just want to kind of go over a couple bullet points I have here.
Yeah.
It says, trauma compromises the brain area that communicates the physical embodied feeling of being alive. And so if you've ever met somebody that feels sort of like has a flat kind of affect or just sort of kind of low energy, they've probably been through trauma, and because it tamps down your energy. And so when the deal with trauma is you have to resolve it for the aliveness to come back and to get out of that frozen sort of state. But what he talks about is how this explains why traumatized people become hypervigilant to threat at the expense of spontaneously engaging in their day-to-day lives. And also...
And that affects how they can enjoy life.
Oh, completely. Well,
the level.
Yeah, and he also talks about how it helps us to also understand why traumatized people so often keep repeating the same problems and have such trouble learning from experiences. We now know their behaviors are not the result of moral failures or signs of lack of willpower or bad character. They are caused by the actual changes in the brain. And this is what explains the addiction issues that I've had, that I used to beat myself up for so horribly. And, when you have a compromised brain, it compromises your impulsivity, it compromises your focus, it compromises your self-esteem because you feel like you have no strength or power. And and so it's so anyway, it just says this vast increase in our knowledge about the basic processes that underlie trauma has also opened up new possibilities to reverse this damage. And then,
so there's hope.
Yeah, well,
there's hope for us all.
There's hope. Well, now that we know what the problem is, because you can go to AA meetings or OA meetings or get.
You can go to meetings forever.
But if you're not dealing with the hyper-aroused brain state and getting that brain to calm down and to regulate, you're still going to be dealing with a hyper-aroused brain that's difficult which makes it's difficult for me to contain. Like, even though I'm not drinking or doing drugs or overeating, I'm still having problems with caffeine. I'm still having problems with impulsivity. And so, thank God I'm out of that self-destructive mode, but still, and so that's why a lot of people go on antidepressants or anti-anxiety meds, because at least they tamped down those alert centers in the brain
Yep.
so that you're not so, because I was really anxious. I had
Right.
horrible
But
anxiety. Go ahead.
oh, absolutely. And that's the thing is right now, what the most popular way to deal with these kinds of hypervigilant anxiety kind of
Mm-hmm.
experiences is that they're going to give you something that's going to
Right.
take the edge off.
Right.
But unfortunately, that takes the edge of life out. And so we've got a bunch of
Yes.
people that are not really experiencing life fully. And like you said, they're a little bit frozen, they're a little bit off.
Right.
It's like there's kind of this blankness about them. You know
Right.
that they're not fully engaging in
Right.
what's really going on, and you're not really sure where their heart is or where their head is, and they
Right.
don't really know either. Again,
Right.
a part of them has gone offline, they've disconnected from themselves, and they're not truly living the most fulfilled life they can, and
Right.
so they're not connected to who they are.
Exactly. The thing that really struck me about all of this is how if first when I read this book, I was really excited, but then I was really pissed off. I'm like, oh my God. So I've been like studying all this personal growth, all this mental health, all this psychology, all this
Yep.
spirituality, and not one mental health professional or one medical professional or one personal development person ever said, Mary, maybe you have trauma. Ever. And so, and the thing, and the other thing that blew me away about this book is like we talked about earlier, you can't heal it with talk therapy alone. It's a somatic, it lives in your
Right.
body. And so like, and
Yep.
after I started working with some of so I'm actually working with some modalities now to heal myself. I didn't realize that my breathing is like so weird. Like I don't breathe like rhythmically at all. It's like my body
Yep.
is sort of like if I really get in touch with my body, it's like it's sort of like I'll notice that my stomach's contracted and I don't even notice it until I just get mindful about my body. I'm
Yep.
like, "Oh my God."
Right.
So it's like it
Yeah.
goes
And
my yeah, go ahead.
and that's what I see all day long in my line of work is people are actually tensed up, they're contracted in some way, they're
Yeah.
lacking blood flow in certain areas, and they're
Yeah.
not getting the oxygen into their blood plasma to even heal any of the cells or any wounds or trauma that you have. And then you're cutting off your brain supply and the nutrients that you need to be able to process.
Exactly.
And people walk around with parts of their body that they don't even have a connection with. They walk around numb, they walk around in pain. And if you're not breathing and you're walking around contracted and squeezed with your shoulders up to your ears all the time, and you're wondering,
Right.
why you're not getting rest when you're sleeping, or why you crash in the middle of the day, it's all because things are out of balance. And out of balance is you have to be able to identify where the unbalance is. And
Right.
again, that's where the brain has to be able to talk about what
Exactly.
are you feeling, what are your needs, and how can you fulfill them yourself.
Right. Well, and like I knew that having deep breathing was, I've learned about breathing exercises for years, but again, my brain has been so dysregulated, it won't let me get into that pattern. And so now that I'm
Yep.
actually doing some neurofeedback, which is a really good modality to actually help rewire my brain to get more
Right. I'm
regulated, more
so excited
organized.
about that.
I just started this like a week and a half ago, and oh my God, the stories I've read on this is just fantastic. In fact, there's a chapter in his book about this. I think it's like one of the 12th or 13th chapter. Um, so, I mean, literally, just after doing 2 sessions of neurofeedback, I was having problems sleeping
Mm-hmm.
before, and I don't have problems sleeping. That's another symptom of a dysregulated brain. You have problems falling
Yep.
asleep, or you have problems staying asleep. Um, the brain is like command central, and so, uh, anyway, so what else? Oh, look at somebody in the chat area. Anne says yoga or trauma sensitive yoga helps one to be present and embodied, whether hypervigilant or shut down. Yes, thank you for that, Anne. Vanderkolk
Yes, thank you.
realized this and uses this. That's one of the things that he's very, very pro on is yoga because it's a body-based and
Yep.
breath-based modality. And
Yep.
then Qigong and EFT he's very pro on,
Yep.
which is the tapping.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah,
I really think that I'm excited about the future because we can start getting psychiatrists and psychologists to start working with mind body practitioners.
right,
Can you imagine the synergy that would happen and the workload that would be spread among many professionals that are very good at what they're doing? And we would finally be able to put this kind of therapy and help together in a very practical way. Not everybody can go to an appointment with a professional psychiatrist,
right,
but most people can afford or have access to a yoga studio or to YouTube or to be
right,
able to team up with a friend and do some meditative walking. It's
right,
so much more attainable when you realize that you don't need any special skills or outside sources. The answers are all within. You just
right,
have to figure out how to connect and what works best for you, whether it
right,
is breathing or it's doing brain training with a computer program. It's kind
right.
of, you get to choose your path and to figure out how that works best for you.
Well, in fact, Dorothy Compton is in the chat, and she wanted you to just repeat what you were saying about oxygen, that she didn't quite catch
Yes.
that.
Yeah, no, that's great, Dot. Thank you for bringing that up. And my passion really is about the cellular level. I truly believe that the next frontier of wellness is going to be talking about electrons and where electrons are at, where they're not, and
Yeah,
what they're doing in our body. And so we need oxygen, obviously, to stay alive,
right,
but there's also places where oxygen are not getting. And so we really need our oxygen molecules to attach to the blood plasma and ride the blood to where it needs to go. Well, what happens if your blood isn't flowing very well? Like if you're tense, if you're
right,
tight, if you're having some edema or lymphatic issues, or if you're having cancer or just any kind of dis-ease in the body, is going to
right,
stop that flow, whether it's
right,
blood or oxygen. And I really feel like once we start looking at the simple idea that your body has to flow
right,
back and forth with the good stuff and then the waste products need to be removed,
right.
wellness and health is going to be demystified
I
because
totally
not
agree.
everybody, yeah, everybody has access to this, and it's information that needs to be shared for free with everybody.
Yes,
And if you can simply just focus on getting more oxygen into your body, whether it's through breathing or it's through hyperbarics, or if it's through a practice like yoga that forces you to do your movements with your breath, or
right,
qigong, you're going to be so much further ahead because your body uses the oxygen to create energy on the cellular level.
totally. Well, I love that. Thank you for
Yeah,
sharing
did
that.
that help, Dot?
We'll wait for her comment.
Yeah, Dot, let me know if that
Well,
if
yeah,
that cleared anything up.
and there's like also what I read in the book was somatic mindfulness. So, really getting in touch with your body and really just tapping into feeling the felt sense of your body when you're walking, when you're sitting,
Mm-hmm.
And you're breathing, and there's a lot of somatic practitioners out there. And if you look up developmental trauma healers or practitioners, I mean, whoever is aware of this type of issue and has some really good healing. A lot of the other thing that I learned about in this book is I did a lot of work on shame and guilt with Brene
Mm-hmm.
Brown. Well, this was before
Mm-hmm.
I found out about Bessel's book and realized that's the other thing about traumatic, having a dysregulated brain from early developmental trauma, is that when we feel disconnected and abandoned from just not feeling attuned or connected, or our parents aren't there for us or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
when we're babies, we have to protect the attachment bond. We cannot make it about our parents.
Yes.
And so
Yep.
we absolutely have to make it about us. And so what happens is, as a baby, you feel bad, and so it makes you feel like you are bad. And so I struggled with shame and guilt for many years, and I thought it was mostly the Catholic upbringing. Well, that was just a little addendum to the initial trauma. But the point is that, but the shame stuff is a big part of trauma too, because our culture does not give us a lot of space to struggle with weakness around what's considered weakness around addiction, or shyness, or any of these types of behaviors or ways that trauma shows up. You know, social anxiety, depression, and then, oh my God, all of the different physical conditions that come out of trauma too. Yeah. And usually those, I mean, sometimes they kick in childhood or in early adulthood. I think most of them kick in like your 40s, 50s, 60s, and later. But what they talk about as well, excuse me, is when you're in a constant state of hyperarousal and you don't even know it because it's the only body and brain you've lived in, it causes a lot of stress on your body. And so that's where fibromyalgia kicks in, chronic fatigue,
all the autoimmune diseases,
even like what were they, lupus, MS, and even I get this. I like about 5 years ago, I started having burning in my feet, and I'm not diabetic, so it wasn't like peripheral neuropathy with diabetes. They called it idiopathic. Right. I am like, I actually found where this is one of the symptoms of a overstressed, nervous system. So even this was caused by my just being in hyperarousal for 55 years. And and you know, I used to think about somatic illnesses, like the way it's portrayed in our culture is people are just making it up because of attention or whatever. And what's really what they're really talking about in this book is that the reason we get sick is because of the overstressed immune system and central nervous system. But we're not even aware that that's what the cause is, because, like I said, you don't even know that you have an overstressed immune system or central nervous system.
Because that's your normal operating system.
Yeah. So, I mean.
Yeah. And I'm so glad that you brought up stress, Mary, because I think if you just keep digging deeper and deeper in the information, you realize that all of the dis-ease in our bodies and in our experiences in life is caused by stress. And stress is such an ambiguous word. It can mean so many different things for so many different people. And it's got a certain label, and the media's got a hold of it, and I'm sure it's got a dollar sign added to it. But the thing about stress is that it throws our body into an unbalanced state. And so then, like I talked about, the flow of the body cannot work normally. Right. And if we get down on the cellular level, which is kind of where my work is that if those electrolytes are not able to free flow in the cell wall, then our body normally starts taking in more sodium than potassium, and then the cell starts to swell. And when it swells, it gets cloudy. Right. And then all the nutrients and the waste cannot be exchanged properly. And on the next level of that is that the electrons that circle our cells are not able to make the cells stable. And that's when we get free radicals, is when we're missing those electrons. And you know, the free radicals start bouncing around, and that's what starts poking holes into our cells, and which can lead to a lot of diseases that can be fatal. Wow. And I want people to understand that this doesn't have to be a mystery, and it doesn't have to be a $1 trillion industry. Right. And you don't have to have access to the best doctors to realize that what we're talking about with retraining the brain is going to reset the system in your body so that you can breathe properly and you get that oxygen, so you can relax into a peaceful state so that your body can rest and digest and heal and use the nutrients that you're bringing in. And so that you don't feel like you have to medicate yourself with drugs, alcohol, food, or work or whatever. Right. So, and medication, what that does is it tells our body that you don't need to do your job now, that this chemical compound that we're ingesting that our organs have to break apart on a molecular level is now going to do the job of what our body naturally does. And then that puts us.
Absolutely. And the other thing is, in Bessel's there's by the way, you guys that are watching, there's a lot of great free YouTube videos for Bessel he shows videos of before and after people that have done brain, healing their brains. And you got to read this book too. And what we really would love it is if you guys buy the book, you just go to Amazon.com and follow through with us, because we're going to be going through the different chronological stages of life with this book. And it's so cool just to really understand how our bodies work and how they respond to different environments. And again, it's nobody's fault. It's not my mom's fault. It's not her mom's fault. No. It's just what it is, And I think that's...
And we're so past blaming. We just don't have time for that.
Everybody has always done the best they could with what they had. And so now it's like, okay. And I really believe that's why this condition, one of the reasons why this condition of developmental trauma has not been talked about is there's shame and taboo around it. Like, oh, I don't want to blame my parents or my upbringing. And unless you can name it, you can't heal it. And so, so we can do this without blame. And the other thing is, as we spoke about earlier in the show, this is a global epidemic. People are running around with dysregulated brains, and they're killing people, they're hurting their families, they're hurting themselves. And it's all because of lack of information, and that there really is help, and it can really help people reduce suffering on such a dramatic level. Because if it doesn't get handled in your generation, you're going to carry it forward in your children, because your children basically inherit your level of brain health. Because basically when you're a baby, your mother is helping you self-regulate. But if your mother can't self-regulate, then you'll never learn how to do that either. And when you can't self-regulate your emotions, that's when you're going to turn to alcohol, drugs, food, work, whatever it is, to calm you down.
Something that will regulate you.
Right. Yep. And so that's what I'm excited about this series that we're doing, Jess and I, is to really get this information out there. And that, and honestly, it kind of like made me realize, like, wow, like, how much free will do we really have? In a way, it's sort of like, I still believe that I have free will, but it's based on the capacity of my brain. You know what I mean?
Yep.
It's like,
working with what you have and what you were given.
Yeah. It's like, so like, oh my God, there's some other really good books I'd love to do some reviews on by Gabor Mate, about like IV drug users, like 95% of them were raised in horrific childhoods. And, but for the grace of God, there go I. At least I just got the alcohol and the marijuana thing. Really, it could have been heroin or crack.
I just get flat brain.
Yeah. So, but the point is that, our environment has a huge impact. And I used to think that my drug and alcohol issues were really genetic. And I think that there's a part of that. But this book really goes into proving that it's environmental. It's how the environment that we're raised in and how our brain develops based on that environment. And again, there's treatment. And one other thing, because we're going to wrap up soon. And this is the reality of it, is that why hasn't there been more awareness about this? Well, if you think about it, basically, the symptoms or the diseases that are really, that are not the core issue, but where the brain dysfunction starts, is like ADHD is very, very common for brain dysfunction. Oppositional defiant disorder is very common for brain dysfunction. any kind of mood disorders, depression, anxiety, any of the personality disorders is very common for brain dysfunction. So all of these, and all the addictions and low self-esteem and all of these things could get handled. And so Bessel talks about how, there's unfortunately the pharmaceuticals are really in bed with the medical industry because they want to keep that drug factory moving. And and so I think, though, the more that we can just get out there and talk about this, the more we can help each other and find. And he goes through many different treatments that are very effective to heal this. Yep. And I'm already experiencing.
And they're much more natural.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly.
Yeah.
So, I'm excited about this. So we're going to be having our next episode of this on November 1st, which is the first Wednesday of November. So hopefully you guys can join us again. We'd love to have you. Let's see if there's anybody else in our chat. Let's see. And is there anything else you want to cover, Jess, before we get rolling?
Yeah, I think I'd just like to wrap up and say that I'm looking forward to having a real, frank conversation about what is happening with our disconnect and real life situations that we can provide information that's hopeful and helpful, that's completely accessible, that's many oftentimes free because of YouTube and TED Talk. If anybody is interested in learning more about these brain scans, the science is finally catching up with what we've been sensing as a human species. And you can go to TED Talk and find all of these brain scans and research that they've been doing. And I just want to encourage people that you don't need to feel shameful or think that what you've gone through is not big enough, or that you compare yourself to somebody that's had a horrific life. If there is something in your life that you feel like is a little bit out of balance, then let's address that. Let's look at that. Let's try to uncover it and go down into the layers of the root of where it began, and then let's heal that.
Right.
And that's what I'm really excited about, is talking about these new ways that we can start thinking and start asking for more of love and compassion into our lives.
Absolutely. That's so key. Thank you for that, Jess.
Thank you, Mary.
Yeah, well, and to add on to that, yes, you don't have to be raised in an alcoholic home or be physically or sexually abused. You literally, even if you're a baby that had surgery when you were a couple days old, that's enough to create a traumatic brain pattern that you can have to live with for the rest of your life, because you don't even realize that that's what created it. So the point is that if there's anything going on in your life that's felt intractable, or that you just can't seem to, connect with people on an intimate level, or you're really struggling with relationships, these can all be very much related to a dysregulated brain. And so I would highly recommend getting the book and following it along with us. Next month on the 1st, Jess is going to be with us again. Where are you going to be next month, Jess?
Where? Did you say where?
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Jess is like a world traveler. She's in Guatemala, she's in Idaho, she's in Alaska. So, okay. Well,
and I wanted. Yeah, and I wanted to just say real quick that I'm in beautiful Sandpoint, Idaho. I'm nestled in the mountains overlooking a lake. And I've been brought in by a private client that is needing some palliative care that I met in Mexico when I was working at the Northern Baja Healing Institute Center with the Gerson therapy. And I was able to work out this deal through barter. My expenses have been covered. I'm living in the home with everybody, sharing space, living in community, and raw juicing, plant-based meals, lots of massages, and increasing blood flow. I'm so thankful, and I know that some of those people that made this happen are watching, and I want to tell everybody that I love them very much, and that I'm living my dream of getting away from the dollar sign and being able to barter my skills so
Yay.
that I can help more people and learn more about myself. And I am getting just as much out of this experience as my client is, as she's comfortable and feeling like she's pursuing her way of life right now in this time. I am being stretched too. And so this is really cool that we're reviewing this book, because it's helping me kind of work through some of those patterns in my brain.
Awesome.
And I can't wait to get into that again next month, wherever
Yes.
I am.
Well, very good. Well, and just so you guys know, next month we're going to be getting into just the first stages of life and how our brains get
Yep.
impacted. And I just wanted to cover a couple last things that he does talk about. There's three avenues to achieve healing trauma. The first is called top down, where you're talking,
Yep.
connecting with others, and allowing others to know and understand what is going on with us while processing the memories of the trauma. Taking medications that shut down inappropriate alarm reactions, or by utilizing other technologies that changes the way the brain organizes information. And I want to acknowledge that, yeah, it would be great if we could all get off our meds. There's no shame in being on meds if that's what you need to be on. But at the same
Right.
time, there's ways to get off or to reduce them too. And then bottom up is allowing the body to have experiences that deeply and viscerally contradict the helplessness, rage, or collapse that result from trauma. And he talks about how most people require a combination of all three. So be sure to join us next month. And so I guess at this point, I'm just going to have to say goodbye to you, Jess. I have a couple of announcements. We're not ending the show, but we're going to say
All
goodbye
right.
to Jess for now. So Jess, thank you so much.
Thank you,
Bye.
guys. Thanks for all
Okay.
the support.
Okay. Wow, that was great. Jess is so awesome. Okay, so I have a couple of announcements, and then we're going to wrap up the show. Um, I do a coaching challenge every month since I'm a life coach, and since we're talking about developmental trauma and how it lives in our body, I just want to encourage everybody that's up for it to just to take a moment, either now or later on tonight, when you've got maybe just 5 minutes, just to sit quietly and just feel what it feels like to be in your body. Turn off your cell phone, put it on airplane mode, and just give yourself a few minutes to do some mindfulness, like somatic mindfulness, and just to feel every part of your body and feel your breath, and really start getting in touch with the body that you're in, because it's so common for us when we've been in a dysregulated brain to like really be like disconnected from our bodies. And I just want to give you that. So I would be interested to see how it goes if you make that a regular practice, because that's what I do. Okay, and then as far as coaching goes, for anybody that would like to reach an audience on a global level, I actually do live stream coaching as well as producing. So if you're not technically oriented, but you'd love to be able to share your knowledge through a webinar or have a talk show like this, I can actually produce your show remotely. So you don't even have to, I'm in Southern California, but you can be in Colorado or Idaho or even in Brazil, and I can actually produce the show for you, and you won't even see me on the screen, but I can actually run the different screens and bring in guests and everything and music. And so if you need any help with that, just go up to my website, marygiuliani.net, and go to the streaming and webinar services. And the other kind of coaching I do is I love helping women that are in midlife to live their highest calling and to really just get in touch with what they truly want to share with the world. And maybe you know what it is, but you haven't gotten the kind of traction you'd like to get on it, or you're in a job, or you can't see how you can sort of shift into this new career or new profession after all these years. I've had all of those issues, and I've been able to do it, and I can share with you how to do it too. So if you would like some coaching on how to live your highest calling, just go up to my website, marygiuliani.net, and go to the coaching section. And what else? I also always ask you at the very end of the show to ask yourself what's one thing you can do to be true to yourself, and put it on your calendar and make a commitment to doing it, because that is what makes your life really, really awesome. So thank you so much for coming. And oh, I can't forget to tell you next week. Oh, I almost forgot. I can't forget this. We are going to have, get this, you're going to love this. Linda Landon is going to be on the show, and her whole theme is how to create a wellness sexuality practice. So if you would like to have a better sex life, whether you're single or in a couple, her whole thing is about helping you open up your sexual energy and move it throughout your body. And as she says, the Taoists had known this for centuries. Awakening this life force energy or chi is a key to increased vitality and longevity. So come back next week at 7 o'clock, and we're going to talk about wellness sexuality. So thanks again, everyone, for being here, and have a great week.